John Gotti, until recently the most notorious mafia boss in America. For a decade, Gotti flouted all attempts to put an end to his criminal career. He became public enemy number one. A succession of mafia defectors have put Gotti and his fellow mafia bosses in jail for life. Omertà, the vow of silence under pain of death, is no longer sacred.
Philip Leonetti and Lawrence Merlino.
Philip Leonetti pled guilty to 7 murders and planned countless others. He ran Philadelphia and Atlantic City for the mob. He is one of the highest-ranking figures ever to betray the mafia. Tonight, he speaks for the first time on television.
Just let us go back. Excuse us.
Everybody would be looking to kill me. I testified against a lot of families. I have people all over the country looking to kill me. And I'm very careful, and I'm going to make the best of it, the best I could do.
Leonetti spent just 5 years in jail for his crimes. Today, he's a protected witness. John Gotti is amongst those he betrayed to earn his freedom.
I went to a grand jury, and I told them everything I knew about John and the meetings we had, about him saying he killed Paul Castellano, about him saying he got the okay from the commission. And I would testify about the family, him being the boss, the structure of his family.
Those who betray the mafia are under sentence of death.
John Gotti would kill anybody, anytime, any place, and just the snap of a finger, he'd issue contracts to kill people.
Today, John Gotti is serving a life sentence without parole in America's maximum security jail at Marion, Illinois.
We are the final stop in the security ladder as an inmate has worked his way into this type of facility.
Putting Gotti behind bars was the FBI's greatest coup against the mafia. It was achieved by placing Bugs in the Ravenite Club, the secret headquarters of America's most powerful mafia family.
This rat fucking research bill, you tell this punk, me, John Gotti, to sever your motherfucking head off, you cocksucker. You're going over there. Listen to me. Now listen. You're going there. You sever your motherfucking head off. You know better over there.
With the matter of days, we knew that John Gotti would be our best witness at any future trials.
He was loose. He should have been more careful, especially after the first case. He should have been more careful where he talked. He was very loose like that. And he's paying for it now.
Before paying the penalty for his crimes, Gotti was the most powerful godfather in America, the latest in a long line of mafia bosses to run New York's Gambino family. He inherited the riches of an underworld empire whose power and influence stretched more than half a century. In the early 1900s, it was the prospect of wealth and a better life that attracted the immigrants from the old world, and it was those who turned to crime and extortion who became the founding fathers of the American mafia. Italian immigrants settled in their own neighborhoods, importing a distrust for the authority of their new country and exporting the traditions of secret societies like the mafia from Sicily.
It's a way of life. It's a way you're brought up. And it's something that started way back from when the Italian people first came over here, and they were like suspicious of law enforcement people because the law enforcement people at that time were a lot of Irish people. And naturally, they didn't get along with the Italians, and they didn't get no relief when they went to courts. So, you know, they started their own thing to help one another. And this formed out of society. You know, the Mafia formed one way. This is La Cosa Nostra. It's different. This is our thing.
Our thing, Cosa Nostra, is the name given to the American mafia. From Italy, they brought a structure and tradition with its roots in the armies of ancient Rome and the mafia families of Sicily. Cosa Nostra consists of a hierarchy of ascending ranks, from the soldiers on the street to the commanding officer, the head of the family, the godfather.
The boss? He's the boss of the family. The buck stops with him. He oversees everything, every family function. And he's the only guy that can make somebody. Then you have the underboss, who takes over when the boss isn't around. Or, you know, whatever the boss tells him to do, he does. And then you have the captains. The captains, they'll report to the boss or the underboss, whichever way the boss wants it, and lets them know what's going on. And you have the soldiers who report to the captains. They let their captain know what they're doing in business, or even like with our family, if you're going to go on a vacation, you let your captain know where you're going, you leave where you're going to be, and when you're coming back, just in case we need you. And then you have the associates that everybody has, you know, to hang around, that are money. Some guys are money makers that are protected by our family. The consigliere is the counselor to the boss. He counsels the boss if there's any problems. If the boss decides to kill anybody, he talks to the consigliere about it and asks his opinion and states the reason why he wants to kill this guy. And then he weighs it and see if he's right, and he'll agree with him or disagree. But they always agree with the boss, you know. The boss is the boss.
For half a century, this secret and highly organized crime syndicate was almost untouchable. In the 1940s and 50s, one of the most notorious bosses was Albert Anastasia, known as the Mad Hatter. He ran his own group of contract killers, Murder Incorporated, and seized power by killing his previous boss.
Well, he took over the family from Vincent Mangano. And from what I hear, he had Mangano killed. And then he just went, he was just out of hand. You know, he was killing people for nothing. And somebody had to take him out because he was just running amok. And then he was charging for memberships, which is against everything that supposedly they stand for. But I think it was just more of a reason to get him killed than, you know, than anything else.
"20 years later, history repeated itself. The barbershop murder of Albert Anastasia was organized by Carlo Gambino, paving the way for Gambino's succession. These are the home movies of a Mafia family. The young Dominic was brought up by his uncle, Nino Gaggi, an up-and-coming mafioso. The well-dressed men who were frequent guests at the family home were in fact some of New York's most dangerous gangsters. Carlo Gambino and his brother-in-law Paul Castellano, later to head the family, are amongst his earliest childhood memories.
The earliest was from when I was real young, 4 or 5 years old, just at family gatherings, birthday parties, anniversaries. It was very big with them. So everybody would always gather, and 40, 50 people, you know, and they were all there. Carlo, Paul, of course my uncle. A lot of people that I didn't know at the time, who later turned out to be, you know, pretty big people.
Anastasia's execution heralded a period of uncertainty. The danger was that his supporters would seek revenge on those who had killed him. Alliances had to be formed to avoid a vendetta.
After Albert got killed in Manhattan, we kind of all locked down in the house. Nobody went out of the house. Everybody stayed in because they didn't know if there was going to be a full-fledged war. And that's actually when Carlo took over, after Albert was killed. And then everything kind of, I remember like everything was kind of changed because when Carlo took over, everybody's stock went up. You know, my uncles included, you know, Paulie's. That was about the earliest memories, I'd say from 5 to 10 years old. I remember it like it was yesterday.
In the early autumn of 1957, with the support of the other families, the way was now clear for Carlo Gambino, the illegal immigrant from Sicily, to become the new boss. This was the birth of the Gambino family.
Sweet little old man. You know, he was small. You know, he looked like he wouldn't hurt a fly. Very quiet. You know, soft-spoken. He was very much like a grandfather type. You know, especially when you're a kid, because you don't know what he does. I didn't know what anybody in the family did. You know, I just knew nobody really got up and went to work.
By chance, Mafia bosses were arrested as they gathered to hold a summit meeting in the autumn of 1957 to ratify the changes in leadership precipitated by the murder of Albert Anastasia.
3 weeks later, 3 weeks following the assassination of Albert Anastasia, out of sequence, all of the La Cosa Nostra organizations around the United States had a national meeting, a national commission meeting. It was held at Appalachian, New York, a rural area in the upper part of New York State. And we know now that one of the purposes of that was to explain who was now in charge in New York. Vito Genovese has taken over from Frank Costello. Albert Anastasia is no more, and Carlo Gambino will now be the head of that family.
With news of the Appalachian arrests, America woke up to discover organized crime on a scale they had never dreamt of.
When as a recorded fact, you apprehended 66 out of more than 100 people at one location who had come from Northern California, Southern California, the state of Colorado, the state of Arizona, had come from Illinois, had come from Ohio, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania. America had never dreamed up till that moment that such a convocation could or did happen.
Appalachian was proof not only of the Mafia, but also of their secret government, the Commission. Yet those arrested were soon released, and it would be almost another 3 decades before there was sufficient evidence to prosecute the Commission itself.
The Commission is the power, is the strength of the mob. They sometimes there's always problems, and they sort of work them out. There could be problems with bosses. There could be problems with a lot of things. So they have a commission for this reason, you know, to stay united. But they have everything to say. They usually set the rules and everything. But it changes over the years because you get new commission bosses and so forth and so on. Right now, I don't think they got a commission because it seems like everybody's in jail. All the commission bosses.
They're made up of the boss of each family in New York, the 5 families. And Philadelphia had a seat on the commission, and also Chicago. They're very powerful. They run the La Cosa Nostra families all over the United States. They're the ones that makes the laws for all the families. And they're the laws everybody has to abide by. They're like our Supreme Court.
Raise your right hand. You solemnly swear the testimony you'll give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? I do.
Despite the revelations of Appalachian and court hearings that followed, it was nearly 3 decades before the commission itself was prosecuted.
7 Union Street. How long have you lived there?
The roots of Mafia power were embedded deep within American society, nowhere more so than within the most powerful labor unions of New York. Control of the Brooklyn waterfront enabled organized crime to extort businesses and divert union funds.
What do you do for a living?
Longshoreman, stevedore.
How long have you been engaged in that?
Since I remember, sir.
All right. Counsel.
Mr. Anastasia, have you ever been arrested?
I don't know what you mean, if I was arrested, sir. I was arrested.
Well, you know what I mean.
I'm the charge of somebody else to come out free, sir.
Well, now, would you forget being arrested for homicide?
I just told you, I was arrested, sir.
When was that?
In 1925?
That's right.
And what was the charge made against you at that time?
I don't recall, sir.
The Union was part of the Gambino family. Anthony Anastasia died in 1963. But the control of the Union by the Gambinos survived through a family connection.
It is better for us as a union to get longer contracts. Because
Anthony Scotto had succeeded his father-in-law, Anthony Anastasia, both as the head of the Longshoremen's Union in Brooklyn and as a capo in the Gambino family. His political influence was very, very strong. He had served as the Kings County chairman for the election of Jimmy Carter when Jimmy Carter became president of the United States. At the time, he was being investigated by the FBI. President Carter was coming to New York to attend a big labor luncheon, and he had the White House call Anthony Scotto to find out would he be attending that dinner because he wanted to chat with him about the upcoming election in 1980. Anthony Scotto turned from that conversation with a staff person in the White House to someone in his office and said, you know, they say the FBI is investigating me, but they can't be that very close to me. Otherwise, wouldn't they tell the President of the United States not to call me or come and see me? That's how powerful he was. He could be dealing directly with the President of the United States as a political ally.
Scotto's political connections were the legacy of the skills and powers of the godfather Carlo Gambino. The Longshoremen's Union was just one of the unions they controlled.
When I was with the family, he had all the unions, the garment center, the docks, a lot of gambling, loan sharking, and it was a big shush-hush, but narcotics. You know, he had all the connections in Sicily. You know. That was the mainstay. When the heroin business really moved from France to Sicily, he had, you know, all the connections there. You know, he used to have on 18th Avenue in Brooklyn, there's a lot of the, what they call greaseballs. They're Sicilians from Sicily. And he had all of them. They were all loyal to Carlo. You know.
In public, Carlo Gambino described himself as a labor relations consultant. In private, control of unions gave him power over some of New York's major industries.
Carlo Gambino saw the future of the mob in legitimate business, and he understood that that relationship between organized crime and legitimate business had to be strengthened. These were not just gangsters back then. They were good businessmen and great politicians. They knew how to work the system.
They worked the system so well that it responded by virtually ignoring the growth of organized crime. Despite the occasional arrest, the Mafia's power survived the 50s through to the 70s virtually unscathed. The FBI under J. Edgar Hoover stubbornly refused to acknowledge the existence of the American Mafia. This young gangster, Vincent the Chin Gigante, was arrested in 1957.
Vinny, did you give yourself up because you were afraid?
No, you're kidding.
He was soon released and survived to become one of the most powerful mafia bosses in the 1990s. In the summer of 1976, after a life of crime untroubled by law enforcement, Carlo Gambino passed away peacefully. It was the Mafia's equivalent of a state funeral. As the Gambino family mourned the passing of their founding father, Mafia bosses from across America came to pay their final respects to a godfather who had become a legend. Not since Appalachian had so many Mafia bosses gathered together in one place.
Well, the heads of all the families came in from as far as California. You know, there's, what, 25, 26 families. And they were all there, because that's what he was. He was the capo de tutte capi, they call it, the boss of bosses. Yeah.
Now there was a vacancy for a new boss of bosses. Paul Castellano, who had married Carlo Gambino's sister, was the leading candidate. Under the rules, the appointment of a new boss had to be approved by the commission and agreed within the family. If there are rival candidates, it can lead to civil war. Neil Della Croce was another contender for the throne. He had been a candidate back in 1957 after the murder of Albert Anastasia. Instead, Carlo Gambino had taken over and made him his underboss.
Everybody was kind of worried because you didn't know who was going to be the boss now. And we had like two real factions of the family. There was the New York, the Manhattan faction and the Brooklyn faction. And that basically came down to whether Paulie was going to be the boss, Castellano, or Aniello Della Croce.
When Carlo Gambino expired, I think people in law enforcement would have put a bet down that the most likely successor was Aniello Della Croce. He's a very powerful man. He had the eyes of a killer. You look in his eyes, you knew he was a very bad man, a powerful man. He had a very strong personal contingent within the family that certainly would have wanted him to rise to that position.
The child, who had grown up within the bosom of the Gambino family, found that he was now to play an important role in the battle for the succession to the throne. In the early 1970s, Dominic Montiglio had gone to Vietnam, joining the army against the wishes of his family.
When the war broke out, I just felt that was the right thing to do. Of course, he was totally against it, and that was another one of the times when I understood who we were. One of the things he told me, he says, "You die for us, not for them." And I said, "For who?" He said, "The government." He said, "If you're going to die, you die for your family." And I said, "Well, this is my country, and this is the way I feel about it." And I went off much to his dislike.
On his return from Vietnam, Montiglio's skills as a soldier were much in demand.
My uncle told me one afternoon, he said, "Go to Roy, over to the Gemini Lounge, and there's a package. Let him give you the package and bring it back home. Get your wife and the kids. They were all going to my brother's house in Staten Island tonight." So I said, "Well, what's going on?" And he said, "We're going to make Paulie tonight." Okay. I went to the Gemini, picked up the package. It was a carbine, an M2 carbine, military. And my uncle told me that at 7 o'clock, the Manhattan faction was coming over, and that Paul, Tommy Bellotti, and him would be downstairs in his kitchen, and they were going to either make Paul the boss, or there was going to be a big war. He said there wasn't supposed to be any weapons at the meeting, but he was going to tape a gun underneath the kitchen table. And he said for me to get upstairs in my living room and put the carbine together, load it up, and there was a driveway that I could overlook, and that's the entrance they had to use to go in. Anybody that came out, because they would all be dead already inside, my Uncle Paul, Tommy. And I guess about 7 o'clock, a car pulled up with Paul and Tommy, and maybe 10 minutes later, the Manhattan crew got there and went downstairs, and I just sat in the window with the sights down on the driveway, and I saw the Manhattan crew come out in about a half hour, maybe less. They got in the car and drove away, and then Nino knocked on my door. Paulie and Tommy had already left also. Nino knocked on my door, and he says, "Come on down, we just made Paulie. Paulie's the new boss." And that was his ascension to the throne that night. Yeah. And he did the same thing that Carlo did. He made Della Croce the underboss. He used the same philosophy, and it worked again. Yeah. It was only 20 years later.
But it was Paul Castellano who took over the mantle as the head of the Gambino family. He chose as his right-hand man and bodyguard a vicious gangster, Tommy Bellotti. Paul Castellano appeared to be just another successful businessman.
He was an interesting man. He was very gentle, soft-spoken, loved business, read the Wall Street Journal every day, was very well self-taught, and loved to meet people and discuss business. He was really into business, buying businesses, merging businesses, and loved the stock market and loved business in general.
Paul Castellano was a butcher by trade, so it was only natural that he went into that business, you know, on the retail level. And he was a millionaire in his own right in the meat industry.
The Godfather became the distributor of one of America's largest food suppliers, Purdue Chicken.
How did he get that contract, do you know?
I don't know. I don't know. The government alleged that he got the contract because Mr. Purdue felt that by using him, he would eliminate any labor problems. That was never proved, and it was just an allegation.
A world away from the supermarkets of Manhattan, in Canarsie, a rundown section of Brooklyn, Paul Castellano was earning millions of dollars a year from just one Mafia crew. Their main activity was an organized car theft ring. The operation was masterminded by a capo who lived in luxury in a $1 million house on Long Island. Roy DeMeo was a psychotic killer whose crimes would eventually lead to the downfall of the Godfather. In the late 70s, he reported to Nino Gaggi, Dominic's uncle. His business deals were run out of a seedy bar on Flatlands Avenue known as the Gemini Lounge. It was there that Dominic Montiglio began his career in the Mafia.
He introduced me to Roy as one of his friends. And the days following, we went to a bar Roy owned on Flatlands Avenue called the Gemini Lounge. And I met the people he had around him, who Nino said, you know, he said they're real sleepers, they're young kids, and they're just, you know, big-time money earners, and they were all killers, you know. And we used to go on Friday nights, every Friday night for about 4 or 5 months, me and Nino, to the Gemini, and then it got to where the crew, Roy's crew, Nino felt, was doing a little bit too much to bring heat to them, so he stopped going, and I just had to go on Friday night. So I was the liaison between Roy and his crew and Paul. You know, I'd take care of all the business between Roy and Paul because Roy had to go through me to see Paul, and Paul really didn't want to see him too much because that crew was bringing so much heat. You know, they were doing so much, stolen cars and drugs and killings, and that Paul felt that if he could keep Roy at arm's length, it would be a lot safer for him.
The money from Roy DeMeo was secretly delivered to Castellano's Staten Island mansion known as the White House. The boss of bosses kept his distance from the street crimes of the family. But when another group of vicious killers in Manhattan began to cause problems for the Mafia in the late 1970s, the boss of bosses was forced to intervene personally. Disputes arose over building contracts at New York City's convention center between the Westies, an Irish gang who ran some of the construction teams, and the Mafia. They were also suspected of killing a powerful Mafia figure.
In the late 70s, there was a very notorious group, a disorganized Irishman called the Westies on the west side of Manhattan. And they were causing problems. They were infringing on some Gambino and Genovese territories. So in the late 1970s, Castellano decided to enlist their support. He had a meeting with Jimmy Coon and Mickey Featherstone, who were the leaders of Westies, and was able to have that faction become a part of the Gambino family.
Well, the Westies were a lot like the DeMeo crew in the sense where they'd kill you for nothing. I mean, they were even worse than the DeMeo crew, you know, as far as just having no reason. I mean, they killed just to have fun, you know. So, yeah, nobody messed with them.
The Italian mob never could control the West Side. They never had control over the Irish. They just could never do it before. And they thought it'd be beneficial to them. We connected up with them. And Jimmy thought it'd be beneficial, so we started associating with them.
Mickey was probably the most feared of all the Westies, you know. I mean, to me, Mickey's, you know, a nice guy. I never had it, you know, but from what you hear, you know, I mean, I met Mickey when I met him. He was a whole other kind of person than I expected. But you heard that Mickey would just kill people and forget about that he even did it.
Well, if people didn't pay up, either in Shylock money or shakedown money, they were told that I would come and I would be the one to get them. Either hurt them or kill them.
And you did that?
Sure. Yes.
The Westies were ruthless killers and loan sharks. Lending money at extortionate rates of interest, they used violence and murder to force repayment. They also borrowed money themselves from loan sharks, sometimes killing them to get rid of their debt. No one knows exactly how many people they murdered, as they devised a gruesome method for getting rid of the evidence.
This was a favorite disposal place for the Westies of bodies, and the Westies would cut the bodies up, bring them up here, and have them disposed of through a contact of theirs. And the bodies would be somehow, or the parts, shot down to the bottom of these facilities and then shot out into the river.
The Westies made a fatal mistake when they murdered Ruby Stein, a Mafia loan shark who was a big money earner for the New York families.
Danny Grillo stepped out from behind the kitchen door, and he called something out to Ruby, and Ruby turned and looked at him, and Danny shot him. And Danny gave the gun to Coonan. Coonan shot him. Richie Ryan and Jimmy Coonan dragged him into the ladies' room where they dismembered his body. Cut him up. I was waiting for Richie Ryan. I wanted to talk to him about what happened. And Nick the Greek came out just with the head in the bag, put that in the trunk of his car, I mean the front seat of his car, then opened up his trunk and put the other body parts in different bags, black garbage bags in the trunk. And he drove off to wherever it was going to be dumped.
The body was taken to the Westies' dumping ground at the sewage plant on Randall's Island. But their usual efficient disposal of corpses went wrong, and evidence of their crime came to the surface.
And this is where Ruby Stein's body, for example, was disposed of and eventually surfaced out in, or his torso, Rockaway, near Kennedy Airport.
Now, what the Westies were doing were killing Italians, which, you know, was getting real dangerous. And eventually, Big Paul Castellano wanted us to call the Westies down for a meeting, and it was to find out if they were, in fact, the ones that killed Ruby Stein, and to bring them into our fold. And the meeting was at Tommaso's restaurant on Bay 8th Street and 86th Street.
It was a Mafia sit-down in Brooklyn. The Westies were suspected of murdering Ruby Stein. The Mafia wanted to recover his black book, a record of millions of dollars out on the street in loans. If the Westies admitted the murder and taking the book, the Mafia would kill them in revenge.
The talk was about finding out about this black book that Ruby Stein left behind. It was, like I told you, the names of customers, and it had quite a few $1 million in it of, you know, Shylock money, which customers had what. And, well, if we denied killing Ruby, we wouldn't know where this black book was, you know. So that's the story that was stuck to. How could we know where the black book was if we had nothing to do with Ruby's death? And that lasted for just a minute or two, and Paul cut it off, and we went right into what our relationship would be, the Westies and the Gambinos.
Featherston and his boss could have been killed for what they had done. But the presence of Paul Castellano inside Tommaso's restaurant allayed their fears.
The thing was, once we knew Paul was there, we knew we were safe. Because if somebody's going to be whacked, he's not going to be sitting in the restaurant.
Castellano set out new rules under which the Westies would operate with his protection.
That anything we did to make money, that we made money on, the Gambinos would get 10% of the profits. And we weren't allowed to kill anybody anymore on spur of the moment, you know, without asking permission. And we would become under the Gambino, we would be under the Gambino's wing, which is under their protection. And we would have more power on the west side as far as if there was trouble with other mob people from different areas of the city. They would be told who we were with and they would back off.
Featherston, the second in command, spent just 4 years in jail for his crimes. He testified against the Mafia and the Westies and is now free under the Federal Witness Protection Program. In the late 70s, the alliance between the Westies and the Mafia represented the height of their respective powers.
The most advantageous thing was that they could get the money to put out on the street. You know, that was number one. Number two, they could get the okays to do certain businesses without stepping on anybody's toes. And in turn, they delivered the West Side to the Gambinos. So it was a pretty good alliance, you know.
One of their rackets on the west side was controlling employment on one of the city's main tourist attractions, the World War II aircraft carrier, the USS Intrepid. Friends and associates were given jobs, and when the managers objected, the Irishmen threatened to cut the ship loose and float it down the Hudson. But the Westies were also hardened killers, a skill that Castellano and the Gambino family could well appreciate.
As a result of this, Paul had his own little murder-for-hire gang who would do any kind of killings or strong-arm work anywhere in the city. And because of that, they were always known as like Paul's secret army, because he always had like a secret weapon. Any dirty work, Paul had all these Westies who would go out and kill anybody, any place, any time.
What was Roy DeMeo's job?
Roy's job was to oversee the operation of the Westies, give them the orders, and also, more importantly, bring back the money which they would earn to pass on to Gaggi and ultimately up to Castellano.
If anything, the Westies were even more brutal than the Mafia themselves. Untroubled by law enforcement, they simply co-opted the Westies to do much of their dirty work. With the Westies under the supervision of the DeMeo crew, the Gambino family was at the peak of its powers in the late 70s.
You know, we really missed you.
You're talking about probably the two most feared crews that since Murder Incorporated, back in the 40s. You know, I mean, people were terrified of both crews. To have them together, you know, was incredible. You know, it was a big coup.
It was a coup which had gone largely unnoticed by law enforcement. The legacy of 30 years of neglect was still being felt in the late 1970s. It was only then that the FBI developed a coherent strategy by setting up dedicated squads to shadow each of the 5 New York families. The largest is the Gambino squad.
In 1980, we had to start from ground zero. The FBI had not worked the family as such for a number of years. So basically, for the first year, we had to do intelligence, identify all the key players, identify the boss, inner boss, what they were doing, where they were talking, all the particular criminal activities, and put together a big intelligence package.
Were you surprised back then that, in fact, you knew remarkably or relatively little about the Gambino family?
When we took over the squad, 1980, There was not an open case when Paul Castellano was the boss, Neil Delacroce underboss, or Joe Gallo. So to me, that was surprising.
Under the leadership of Bruce Mao, a veteran of the Cold War, all that was about to change. One of their first intelligence targets was the underboss, Neil Delacroce. As early as 1977, the police had in fact started to accumulate surveillance film on the comings and goings at the Ravenite Club in Little Italy. The FBI began to identify who these figures were and what they were doing. They caught an early glimpse of the gangster who was later to haunt them with his mocking jibes of invincibility, John Gotti.
Well, that was Delacroce's club. John Gotti, Angelo Ruggiero, Willie Boy. That was the Manhattan faction of the Gambinos. And we very rarely went to each other's clubs. You know, it was like the Christmas time. You know, everybody made the rounds. And I was in the Ravenite maybe 7, 8 times. And it was always either on a Christmas or just to bring a message. And, you know, I never would hang out there. You know, we stayed basically in Brooklyn.
Over in Queens was another Gambino social club, the Bergen Hunt and Fish Club, which was now also targeted by the FBI. This seemed to be an even more promising location to launch their new assault on the Mafia.
And in 1981, after a lot of work, a lot of intelligence, and a lot of contact with informants, we discovered what we consider to be the weak link, and that was known as the Bergen Hunt and Fish Crew, led by John Gotti.
The FBI zeroed in on John Gotti's closest friend, an overweight chain-smoking gangster called Angelo Ruggiero.
In 1981, we were able to install electronic listening devices in the home of Angelo Ruggiero, who was a very close associate of John Gotti, and he was then a member of the Gambino crime family. Ruggiero had a particular problem, and that is he talked too much.
There was nothing the FBI liked more than wise guys who talked too much. Even within the Mafia, Ruggiero was known as Quack Quack. With court approval, they put a bug in his home.
That bug was just a gold mine of information. We obtained detailed information regarding the workings of the family, meetings at Castellano's house, all the politics, all the interaction, meetings at Delacroce's house. But more importantly, we literally stumbled into a major narcotics operation, which was engineered by Ruggiero, which also implicated a fellow named Gene Gotti, John's younger brother, a guy named John Caniglia, other members of his crew. And it turned out to be a major heroin trafficking network.
Don't see nobody talk to like, come right to my house now. All right.
The loose tongue of Gotti's friend was a breakthrough for the FBI. It not only provided evidence which they could use to bring a case against Angelo Ruggiero, it also provided them with what is legally known as probable cause, the required proof to place bugs in other locations. Now they could secretly bug the home of underboss Neil Delacroce. They could even contemplate what had previously been unthinkable, putting a secret microphone inside the house of the most powerful mafia boss in the country.
He ran the Gambino crime family, and the Gambino crime family at that time was the most powerful crime family in the United States. So I have to say that he was probably the most powerful mobster in the country.
Within the space of 2 years, the FBI would achieve their most spectacular coup in the war against organized crime.
Nobody ever really thought that you could make a criminal case against a guy like that. He was viewed as untouchable by law enforcement.
New York City, capital of the Mafia's organized crime syndicate. 5 families run an empire which extends throughout the country. The most powerful of them all is the Gambino family.
I don't think there really is a business that you could mention that isn't touched by the Gambino family in New York. In one way or another, you're paying the Gambino family, whether it's through a union, whether it's through a distribution company, or somehow they're going to touch on whatever you get. You know, the consumer is going to pay somehow.
At the height of their power in the early 1980s, the Mafia were likened to a second government. They had the power of life and death and an enormous impact on the entire economy of America.
What really affects the people here in the United States in their pocketbooks is the involvement of La Cosa Nostra in industries, in legitimate businesses. And that's where the Gambino family was with both feet. They were involved in a whole variety of legitimate industries in the New York metropolitan area. And through that involvement, they were able to have a direct impact on the pocketbooks of the people here in New York. And indeed, it trickled down and had an effect throughout the United States. When I'm talking about industries, I'm talking about trucking, I'm talking about various manufacturing industries, I'm talking about construction, I'm talking about the carting business, I'm talking about the waterfront. So there are a whole variety of industries that the Gambino family either controlled through their involvement in running labor unions, or if they didn't control, they played a very significant role in.
Control of legitimate business was the legacy of Carlo Gambino, the founder of the Gambino family. The legendary godfather passed away peacefully in the summer of 1976. His anointed successor was Paul Castellano. His inheritance was untold wealth and power. From $1 million mansion on Staten Island, he ran a criminal empire and an army of Mafia soldiers. In the 1970s, a new breed of gangster appeared on the streets of New York. Ruthless, violent, and greedy, their trade was drugs, pornography, and death. Their activities would precipitate a clash with the old guard and ultimately lead to a civil war. In Little Italy, Gambino soldiers like John Gotti epitomized the new breed. Their brash style would attract greater attention from law enforcement and the disapproval of the older generation. But no one could argue with the enormous sums of money they earned for the Mafia. Typical of the new breed was another capo in the Gambino family, Roy DeMeo. He was making millions for himself and the boss of the family.
Roy was very important for two reasons. Number one, he was the muscle behind Paul Castellano. He was the, when they needed it, the DeMeo crew could deliver on orders from Nino to take care of business for Castellano. And then secondly, Roy was what we call, what they call a money maker. And through all his illegal activities, he could generate a lot of money. And not every wise guy can do that, but Roy was good at it.
Dominic Montiglio grew up as a young child surrounded by a loving Italian family. His childhood memories are like something out of The Godfather. Some of the friends and relatives that came to visit were members of the powerful Gambino family. Dominic Montiglio's uncle was Nino Gaggi. He supervised the DeMeo crew and reported to Castellano. Dominic grew up to become a trusted go-between at the highest levels of the Mafia.
If Roy had needed permission to do something, you know, I would go to Paul Castellano and get the okay for Roy to do it. I would bring Paul money from Roy. On Mondays, I'd go see Paul. I'd see Roy over the weekend. And he would give me X amount of money for Paul and X amount of money for my uncle, which I'd keep and give Paul his end. And then if Roy needed to see Paul for something that I wasn't privy to, I'd have to go to Paul, tell him Roy wants to see you, go back, tell Roy, oh, it's okay, you can meet him here at this time, at this restaurant or whatever. That's basically what it was.
Castellano's image as a respectable millionaire businessman was far removed from the reality of the street crimes committed by his family. The Canarsie section of Brooklyn was the center for one of their most lucrative operations. they ran a highly organized ring of car thieves. Luxury cars were stolen to order, given new identities in backstreet garages known as chop shops, and then shipped to the Middle East. Every week, hundreds of thousands of dollars in cash from this one operation alone was delivered to Paul Castellano's home. The Godfather's mansion was known as the White House, but his wealth and power came from murder and torture.
He was scared of Roy. That's what he was. Not only about how much they were doing with the pornography, the stolen cars, the drugs, and the killings, but I think he was scared of Roy because, you see, the DeMeo crew had one thing. They made you disappear. You know, they felt they could kill anyone as long as they made them disappear. And countless people went that way. They had it down to a science. So Paul Castellano was a little intimidated, but he wanted to keep him around because of the amounts of money that they were bringing in. You know, it was massive amounts of money. The narcotics alone was bringing in $150,000 a week. So it was just one part of it. The stolen cars, they were shipping to Kuwait. That was bringing God knows how much money, you know. Pornography was bringing a lot of money. I would say that that crew alone was bringing in close to $250,000 a week. You know, that's not something you want to lose.
Car theft and murder were not normally crimes that were linked together, but for the Mafia it was all in a day's work. To protect their own profits, the DeMeo crew did not hesitate to kill. Eventually these unsolved murders came to the attention of the FBI. Suspecting a Mafia connection, a task force was set up with the New York police, the FBI, and a special prosecutor. Artie Ruffles was the FBI case agent.
Well, actually, they killed quite a few people over cars. Their car business was very important, and they killed a lot of people over the cars.
It wasn't just the cars. From their Brooklyn headquarters, a bar called the Gemini Lounge, Roy DeMeo ran the car theft ring and his other operations, drugs and pornography. But the crew's speciality was getting rid of people. One contract was for the Godfather himself. Beneath the business suits, Castellano was as brutal as his street soldiers. When he discovered that his son-in-law was unfaithful and violent to his daughter Connie, seen with him here, he called on the services of his disposal experts. In true Sicilian tradition of revenge being a dish best eaten cold, he bided his time.
After a couple of years, the contract was put out to kill Frankie Amato. Paul used his muscle crew, the DeMeo crew, and they lured Frankie over here to the club because they had heard Frank was in the window, storm window and screen business. So they lured him over on a pretext of getting new windows and screens. Once they had him inside, then they killed him.
Subsequently, they had Paul, after a time had passed, had the DeMeo crew set him up and call him down to the apartment. And he went in and he came out in boxes. You know, so Paul had him killed. And the DeMeo crew was the ones that did it.
The killing took place in this apartment building behind the Gemini Lounge. The body was never discovered. Roy's home was a world away from Canarsie, Brooklyn, where he worked. He owned a luxury house on Long Island, where he spent the weekends and said grace before meals. In the neighborhood, he had the reputation for being a good family man. This is a home video seized by the FBI, which shows Roy DeMeo, the man on the right, in the company of his crew. Those who worked with him knew the truth about what he did, and they too became steeped in blood. Vicious young gangsters like Henry Borelli, a close friend of Dominic Montiglio, currently serving a life sentence in prison for multiple murder. Roy's cousin, nicknamed Dracula. Chris Rosenberg, a young psychopath who worshipped Roy as a father figure and wanted to change his name to DeMeo so that he could join the Mafia. By the late 70s, DeMeo had a crew of serial killers whose activities were brutal even by Mafia standards. The myth that the Mafia murdered only its own is belied by the activities of the DeMeo crew. Almost anyone could fall victim to their brutality. The art of killing and making the bodies disappear became a cold-blooded science. Their exploits in the apartment behind the Gemini Lounge were a horrific testimony to the reality of Mafia violence.
Usually, they'd get you in the apartment behind the Gemini. They'd use a reason for you to come there. And what would happen is when you'd walk in the door, usually Roy or Henry would shoot you in the head with a silencer, pistol-equipped silencer, wrap a towel around your head to stop the blood from shooting all over the place. Usually Chris Rosenberg would stab you in the heart to stop the blood from pumping. Then they take you to this bathroom and hang you in the shower and cut your veins on the side of your neck and bleed you for about 40 minutes until as much blood was out as they could get out. Then they'd put you on like a pool liner or a tarpaulin, and they would just take you apart, put you in plastic bags, and then usually in boxes, and you'd go to the Fountain Avenue dump in Brooklyn, which is it's the big trash dump in Brooklyn where all the refuse goes. And Anthony Senta, his uncles or his cousins had a carting company, and they would just throw it in the garbage truck and it would go to the Fountain Avenue dump and never to be seen again. And that was the Gemini method.
So this was a highly efficient way?
Very efficient. It was like an assembly line. Everybody had their job. And I mean, it got down to the point where I've been in the apartment where there was a body hanging in the shower and they were sitting in the kitchen just eating meatballs and spaghetti, you know, just waiting for it to bleed out. You know, so it didn't matter to them, you know.
All that mattered was money. Human life was cheap. In the new year of 1979, they bought $500,000 worth of cocaine in Miami, killing the suppliers to avoid payment. The drug deal and the double cross had been set up by Chris, Roy's right-hand man, who changed his name to DeMeo because he wanted to be his son. But this time the DeMeo crew had gone too far. Amongst their victims were well-connected Cuban drug dealers. The Cubans investigated what had happened and sent a hit team to New York. Dominic Montiglio acted as the intermediary between the Cubans and the Mafia.
It was the Cuban crisis that their crew murdered 5 people on a drug deal. It was a father and son, 2 Jewish guys, and 3 Cubans. And I was hanging out with like one of the top Cubans in New York, Pedro Rodriguez. They used to call him Paz. And he came up to me at his apartment one night and showed me this name. And it was Chris DeMeo. I immediately knew who it was, even though he used, it was Chris, was Roy's right-hand man.
Pedro Rodriguez had a team of 20 Cuban gunmen ready to go to war. When they discovered who was responsible for the double cross, they made an arrangement. His execution would be sufficient revenge for the murdered Cubans and the stolen drugs.
And Pedro told me that all the Cubans in Miami wanted was Chris. Because there was Chris, Joey, Anthony was involved. All they wanted was the guy that set it up. They wanted it done where it would be in the newspapers. They wouldn't just take our word that, the guy was gone. I had to be with the Cubans every day now, because Roy knew that the only way to resolve this thing was to kill Chris. And the Cubans wanted it done, and he wasn't moving on it. And it was, I guess, about close to a month. And I had to go over with these Cubans. I mean, I was carrying 2 pistols at the time, every day. Because I knew one thing: if the Cubans were going to make a move on the DeMeo crew, I wasn't never coming out of that apartment. So I was pressing for Roy to do this thing. what happened, the final straw, was there was a kid named Dominic Ragucci who was working his way through college selling vacuum cleaners. And if I'm not mistaken, he was half Puerto Rican, half Italian. And he was doing his paperwork in front of Roy's house. And at this point, Roy had become so paranoid. I mean, he was seeing Cuban hitmen behind the trees. He thought this guy was laying out to blow his house up or something. And it was in the middle of the day, in the afternoon. And him and Joey Dracula, who was his cousin, Joey Guillermo, they took off after they came walking out with pistols. When the kids saw the pistols, he took off in his car. They jumped in the car, and they started chasing him. In this broad daylight, they drove from the South Shore of Long Island to the North Shore of Long Island, going fast. Roy shooting out the window and driving, and Joey reloading the guns. And Joey's so nervous as he's reloading the gun, he's shooting holes in the floor of the car. And finally, this kid Ragucci either hit something, or they stopped him. And from what the witnesses say, from what Roy told me, he just took like a military stance and shot the kid like 9 times. It came out who this kid was. He was just, a kid working his way through college, and that was it. Roy got called down on it on a Monday night, and Nino told him, get rid of Chris, settle this problem, because we can't bother with this anymore. You're starting to get wacky on me. And they killed Chris, and they parked him in a car by Floyd Bennett Field, by the Marine Park Bridge, after they killed him. And they went by the car and they machine gunned it. So it would make the newspapers. It was just a regular killing, might not make the newspapers, and had to make the newspapers, which it did. And I think that was the closest we came to having a war with someone other than the family, and all the time I was ever with them. Because, the Cubans had sent people up from Miami. They were ready to go, So, but that's the point that Roy had gotten to. He was so paranoid, and it just spread throughout the crew. And Danny Grillo, they murdered him. Chris, they murdered. They just started killing each other.
The Civil War dispensed justice Mafia style. Those that survived became the targets of an FBI NYPD task force. It was one of the most significant cases in the FBI's war against the Mafia. Time was running out for Roy DeMeo.
As I got to know the gory details of this crew, it became more and more a personal war with the Mafia, that we should destroy an organization of this magnitude and that was capable of committing these heinous crimes. And it was with great satisfaction that we brought them down and prosecuted them.
From a nondescript office in Queens, Bruce Mao still runs a team of agents targeting the entire Gambino family. The murderous exploits of the DeMeo crew were just one of his early investigations. As his agents tracked the DeMeo crew, Bruce Mao and the Gambino squad were also targeting the highest levels of the Mafia. The strategy was to connect the crimes of the soldiers on the street all the way up to the Godfather himself. It was on the streets of Little Italy at the Ravenite, the Gambino family's Manhattan social club, that the police and the FBI had John Gotti under surveillance. Angelo Ruggiero was Gotti's top lieutenant. The overweight gangster never stopped talking. He was nicknamed Quack Quack, and the FBI had planted a bug in his house.
Transportation is your transportation, so you're eliminating that. We're going to pay for that. Yeah, what are you giving the guy? I don't know. I don't know how many you got coming in. I'm about 20 days. No, I'm looking crazy. What are we talking about? Okay. We're going to find a different place.
The FBI tapes proved that Ruggiero was supervising a massive drugs operation, even though Castellano had outlawed drug dealing. The talkative wise guy was also overheard discussing the internal affairs of the family.
So we learned a tremendous amount of information about the inner workings of the family, a lot of the criminal activities, We learned about meetings up at Castellano's house. For example, Ruggiero used to go up there on Sunday a lot with John Gotti. Ruggiero returned back to his house, invite Gene Gotti over, and then Angelo would tell Jeannie exactly what transpired that afternoon up in Paul's house, from A to Z, the whole format. The next phase, following the Ruggiero electronic surveillance, was to go after the hierarchy. And based on all the conversations that we intercepted in Angelo's house, we had probable cause to bug the house of Paul Castellano, who was the boss of the family at that time.
Ruggiero's indiscretions enabled the FBI to get a warrant to break into the White House, Castellano's Staten Island mansion.
There was an alarm system, and it was activated, and we figured we probably had about 25 or 30 seconds to deactivate it. We used a computerized digital scanner, electronic device which somehow goes through 10,000 possible combinations when aimed directly at the control panel, and comes up with the combination of that particular system. It worked. Then it's just a matter of punching in the number, the 4-digit code, which Andy Kearns did, and that deactivated the system, glowed green instead of red, and we were in. When we left, we had to reactivate the system the same way, and lock the door and go out. We made provision for a sanitation truck to stall out in the road, preventing the security guard from coming upon us. He would have to detour all the way around, give us about another 4 minutes. Base contained a power pack and battery, which powered the mic during the day when the lamp was off. Then when the lamp was on at night, that would in effect power the bug and recharge the battery for the next day.
The entire operation took just 12 minutes. Half a mile away, the FBI, posing as commuters, rented an apartment above a doctor's surgery. Agents Andy Curins and Joe O'Brien would monitor the bug night and day.
We had Brooklyn. We're not Brooklyn. We always hired at point. At one time, we stepped out of line where I remember the your father and his house. We think you stand a good chance to win this election. And I think it should be at least 50-50. You feel that way about it? Go ahead. Now, it turned out to be a mistake because they had 5%. Without the move. In the meantime, we had to take all these repercussions.
What was your own personal feeling when you first heard the voice of Paul Castellano coming through on the boat?
I was ecstatic. I was really excited.
Why?
It was the highlight of my career, because I knew that the FBI had just legally monitored a conversation which would lead to Godfather's downfall. He'd go to jail, spend the rest of his life in jail because of those conversations. And there's no way he'd get out of them. These were his own words. He was talking about criminal activity, conspiring to commit other crimes, extortion, talked about loan sharking, control of unions, murder, the whole gambit of racketeering activity.
As Castellano was conducting the family's business from his home, the FBI were able to eavesdrop on the high-level visitors who came to pay their money and their respect.
The bug provided like a 4-month window into the operations of the de facto headquarters and nerve center of the Mafia in America. Paul Castellano was the chairman of the commission, the boss of bosses, the godfather, ruled over all the families, and was the head of the Gambino family. And here, the FBI had a bug in his house.
At the same time as the Castellano bug was producing damning evidence against the Godfather, other agencies were accumulating hundreds of hours of tapes on other major Mafia figures. For the first time, they had cast-iron evidence of the activities of the Commission, the Mafia's secret government.
It showed how the different families divided up the turf, if you will, in these different industries, and how they all shared the profits, and how the bosses of the families belonged to what was later referred to as a club. They would determine which mob-connected family was going to bid on a particular job, high-rise construction job in Manhattan, and who would not, and whose turn it was. That's the way it worked.
The tapes revealed that as well as running the Mafia, the Commission controlled the entire construction industry of New York. A club had been set up to carve up the contracts between 4 families. The 5th family, the Bonanno family, had been banned because of their wholesale heroin trafficking. The cartel owned the unions that ran the labor sites and the companies that supplied the concrete.
All concrete, high-rise business in Manhattan was controlled and dominated by organized crime. The 4 families that were sitting on the commission at that time each had their own concrete companies that they controlled, their own cement pouring companies they controlled. But in order to dominate the whole city, they had to come together. And the commission gave them the mechanism to coordinate and carry out their scheme to extract a tax from everybody who was pouring concrete in the city for years.
Castellano himself owned several construction companies. Surveillance showed businessmen arriving at his house on Staten Island to seek the Godfather's blessing on major building contracts. One of his partners in crime was the boss of the Genovese family, Fat Tony Salerno. The FBI had bugged his headquarters, a social club in Upper Harlem. It confirmed the multi-million-dollar payoffs from construction. The evidence against the commission was mounting.
2% of the money had to be extracted and divided up among the commission. So if you consider that there have to be hundreds of millions of dollars a year in concrete high-rise work in the city of New York and in the island of Manhattan, it had to be the case they were making tens of millions of dollars every year just from this aspect of their control over the building trade.
So every building, every skyscraper that went up in New York City, they would be getting millions of dollars from.
Exactly.
As law enforcement agencies gathered a wealth of intelligence on the leadership of the Mafia, the New York police were making headway on the streets. Their joint task force had been set up with the FBI to investigate links between the Mafia and a series of killings in the Canarsie section of Brooklyn. Their biggest break came with the chance arrest of Vito Arena, a Mafia hitman who had stolen hundreds of cars for Roy DeMeo. What he had to say sickened even the most hardened detectives. Now the finger pointed clearly at Roy DeMeo. Before they could question him, the Mafia moved first.
His wife reported him missing that evening that he had been murdered. And the reason that she reported it early was it was his daughter's birthday. And he was supposed to bring the cake home. And they were having a birthday party, and he never showed.
The contract to kill Roy had been issued by the Godfather himself, Paul Castellano. It is believed that Montiglio's uncle, Nino Gaggi, set him up.
The Gambino family found out that Roy had killed numerous people without any kind of authority. He got out of control, he'd become dangerous. So they decided to kill him because of his own killings, for lack of a better word.
When Castellano got wind that the task force was moving in on Roy, he couldn't risk the chance that DeMeo might turn and become an informer and point the finger at him. The Godfather hoped that if DeMeo disappeared, so would the investigation.
And I think they felt that if they killed him at that point, because it was the DeMeo crew, if they killed him at that point, I think they thought that it was going to stop the task force from further investigation. You know, because he was like the head target in their minds. I think they felt that if they killed him, it would cool down. You know.
He had bullet holes through both hands, where he tried to defend himself, and then he was shot through the chest and in the head. Pretty good job, and also very much like the DeMeo crew type killing. I had to say when I saw Roy there that this was real justice. Roy got what was coming to him.
Why?
Because of all the people he had killed, innocent people he had killed, and all the suffering he had brought on those families, loved ones. Nobody should be able to do that.
But DeMeo had got away with it for years, causing untold misery to his victims and their relatives. One of them was Jackie Todaro, a 19-year-old law student. Her father had a film laboratory in Manhattan. The DeMeo crew realized its potential for the growing pornography business. Jackie's father did not want them to take control of his business. Today she's been left with little more than her childhood memories.
His body, they never found any part of the remains of his body. We never had a funeral, we never had a memorial service, we didn't know. I mean, we just didn't know. We lived with complete uncertainty.
Sadly, Jackie, who was just 5 when her father was murdered, was not alone in her bereavement. The DeMeo wing of the Gambino family will go down in history as mass murderers.
How many people do you think he killed?
They may have killed 200 to 300 as a crew. But Roy personally, I would say 50 to 60. He certainly used to brag about those numbers.
Dominic Montiglio narrowly avoided becoming another of their victims. Although he denies taking part in any of their murders, he admits dealing drugs. That was enough to get him in trouble with the family. He was also accused of stealing $250,000 from the Mafia.
There were stories all around New York, and I got accused of being a heroin dealer, which I never dealt heroin. I dealt a lot of drugs, but never heroin. And that Paulie Castellano himself had to sit with Flimsy Thierry, who was at the time the head of the Genovese family, and straighten that one out. And then I got a call one night, and just from somebody I'm not going to mention, just somebody inside, and said, Dominic, it's time to leave, man. They're going to pop you.
Montiglio escaped to California, but made the mistake of coming back to Brooklyn. He was arrested and heard that the Mafia was planning to kill him in jail. The only way out was to betray the Gambino family and become a government witness.
I guess it was a Saturday morning. I called. I guess it was the FBI, the strike force, and they got me out of there. I was out of there like within an hour. You know, it was a short time.
68-year-old Paul Castellano, described as the boss of a 20-man crew that ran an extensive...
Now a witness could testify from the inside to the links between the crimes of Roy DeMeo and the most powerful godfather in America, Paul Castellano.
That included 25 murders.
You're welcome. All them on Rich.
Later, separate charges were brought against the commission. Fat Tony Salerno, boss of the Genovese family, was arrested. Paul Castellano was also indicted on the commission case, mortified to hear that the FBI had managed to bug his home.
What's happened?
He knew that if we had a bug in there, we were aware of the criminal conversations. He knew he was history. He knew he was going to jail, probably for life. But he was more concerned about the personal conversations we would have overheard. Conversations with his wife, disputes with her, conversations possibly with his sons and daughter if they stopped over to visit, and very personal conversations with Gloria, his maid, with whom he was having a love affair.
Well, he was surprised and upset, and I didn't really know why he was so upset until later on when we got the tapes. He had committed some indiscretions, and I think he was embarrassed by them. The indiscretions being with a maid that you might have read about in some of the books. That was embarrassing to him.
But he wasn't embarrassed about other things that they might have picked up?
Well, I think he was upset by them, but not nearly as embarrassed. There was discussion of criminal activity on those tapes. So certainly he would have had to face that down the road.
We respect them because we think it's our union. We're making the thing now, you know, what's the line. And what's going to happen?
Castellano wasn't the only one facing problems from incriminating conversations recorded on tape. Tapes from an earlier FBI bug revealed activities within the family that even the godfather was unaware of. These tapes in turn would trigger an extraordinary chain of events that would ultimately lead to his downfall. In the 1980s, John Gotti was earning hundreds of thousands of dollars for the godfather. What Castellano did not know was that much of the money was coming from heroin trafficking operations. Castellano and fellow commission bosses like Tony Dux Corallo had forbidden drug dealing in the Mafia on pain of death. A bug inside his Jaguar recorded the Mafia leadership's opposition to drugs.
They just let certain people do it, big time, and that was usually heroin. And the rest of us, the rule really was just don't get caught. It wasn't don't do it. They said it was don't do it, but the rule was don't get caught. You know, because then you can get killed.
Paul had a dual standard when it came to narcotics dealing. Technically, the Gambino family was against any kind of narcotics dealing. If you were caught dealing narcotics or even suspected of dealing narcotics, the penalty was automatic death. You were killed immediately for dealing narcotics. But Paul had two faces with regards to this. If he liked you, he would look the other way, condone in his own tacit way the narcotics dealing. He'd get the money from it, he'd benefit from it. If he didn't like you, he'd enforce the edict and have you killed. So like a dual standard.
Ruggiero was picked up on bugs, talking about heroin.
Ruggiero was facing a life sentence from the courts and a death sentence from the Mafia. Before the case came to trial, Castellano wanted to hear the evidence for himself.
Castellano and his people were demanding access to to the bugs, and obviously Ruggiero didn't want it turned over because it demonstrated unmistakably that he and his closest associates were involved in narcotics trafficking. So they were trying to keep these tapes away from Castellano, and sort of mediating this dispute between the Gotti faction and Castellano was Neil Delacroce.
Castellano ordered Della Croce, the underboss of the Gambino family, to collect the tapes from Ruggiero's defense lawyers. Della Croce held a series of meetings with Gotti and Ruggiero at his Staten Island home. Ironically, the FBI had a bug in his sitting room too.
I'm going to tell you something. If you two never bother with me again in the rest of my life, I ain't giving up saying something. If you never bother with me again the rest of my life, I can't. There's good friends of mine on them fucking tapes. It was some fucking asshole like Buddy or somebody like that. I give it to the 3 seconds flat. There's good guys on them fucking tapes.
One of the good guys was Eugene Gotti, a major drug dealer and John Gotti's brother.
Not only you could get right, I could get right, you could get right. I'm not on the stretch already. I can't stop the guy from always bringing it up. Unless I tell the guy, hey, why don't you go fuck yourself? And stop bringing these tapes up. Then all we gotta do then, we go and roll up and go to war.
Going to war was the only alternative if they didn't obey Castellano and surrender the tapes. Della Croce's warning was prophetic. He died of cancer on the 2nd of December 1985, and without his protection, Gotti was dangerously exposed. One Mafia insider heard the details of the dispute from his uncle, a fellow Mafia boss.
Paul Castellano was complaining to my uncle one time about these guys in his family that are dealing with drugs. And right away, we were thinking of his cousins. But he didn't mean his cousins. He meant John Gotti and this Angelo Ruggiero. Because there were tapes that these fellows were on that Paul was trying to get, and he was complaining to my uncle that these guys aren't giving him the tapes. And he wants them. And he said, we can't have drug dealers in our family. So we talked to a few people, and they told us the story about John Gotti and Angelo, that Paul, the difference between them and the underboss Neil Della Croce. So eventually there was a hit put out on John. John told us this. Paul wanted to kill him. He found out about it, and he moved first.
Jesus Christ, they're right next to us.
On 3 separate occasions, John Gotti won acquittals on charges that ranged from racketeering to assault. For 6 years, from 1985 to 1991, Gotti's fame and notoriety would reach unprecedented heights.
I'll say you with respect to defendant John Gotti, guilty or not guilty?
We find him not guilty.
John Gotti's acquitted in a jury verdict. However, one of the jurors had been bribed in the amount of $60,000, so he had no chance of losing that case. He had a sure winner.
Gotti became a local hero, hosting annual parties on the 4th of July. Yet Gotti bought his freedom by bribing juries and intimidating witnesses. He even had a New York police detective on the payroll. One former Mafia insider explains how they fix their cases.
All you need is one to hold out on the jury. So even if you don't get an acquittal, the worst it could be is a hung jury. You're a winner right there, you know? And if you could get to the witness, today you can't get to it, but if you could, you naturally try and kill the witnesses. Years ago, when they didn't have this Federal Protection Act and all, it was easier to kill the witnesses. Today it's a little harder. Even now with the jurors, it's getting harder because they make them anonymous and they sequester them. They keep them out of sight. The marshals protect them until after the trial. So it's getting more and more difficult to try to get to a jury to fix a case.
When you say get to a jury, what do you mean?
Private jury. You offer them a certain amount of money to come up with a not guilty verdict.
And if they say no?
Well, if they say no, and they better get off the jury, or, well, no, not really. They better stay on the jury. They can't say no. They can't say no. They're in a position where they could save our lives. Our lives are on the line. They would have a big problem. It's hard. It's hard for a legitimate person on the jury to get confronted by a mob guy and turn around and say, no, I ain't doing that. Of course, you got to do it. And it ain't the juror's fault. He's scared. He's scared for his family. He's a legitimate guy. He don't know about all these killings and these murders. He ain't involved with all that kind of stuff. It's really, it's hard for a juror to really say no to somebody because they're scared to death.
Because you scared them to death?
Yeah, that's right.
Last night, as Castellano stepped from a limousine in front of a Manhattan steakhouse, he was shot down by 3 men hiding guns.
Although it was widely known that Gotti was behind the killing of his previous boss, Paul Castellano, it would take 6 years to bring the new head of the Gambino family to justice.
Has New York seen a mob murder of this great a magnitude?
Castellano had in fact been betrayed by his closest associate. His underboss, Frank DeCicco, had helped Gotti organize the murder. 3 months later, DeCicco himself was murdered when his car was blown up in Brooklyn. The hand of Gotti was again suspected, but again there was no proof. Now, a ruthless killer and bodybuilder, Sammy the Bull Gravano, became Gotti's most trusted lieutenant. Ironically, Gravano, like DeCicco before him, would eventually betray the Godfather and become a government witness. But until then, they would have to play a waiting game.
Anytime we open a case, we always set 2 objectives we try to accomplish and realize that to work an organized crime case, a lot of our traditional methods don't work, i.e. They don't use the telephones to talk, to engage in legal conversations. You won't find their handwriting in any documents as far as paper trails. You won't find witnesses who will testify. So there's really only 2 ways to get a fellow like John Gotti. The first way, of course, through electronic surveillance, to try to put a bug in the place where he's running the affairs of the Gambino family to capture those criminal conversations. Our second goal, which is more difficult, is to try to turn somebody in Gotti's inner circle, a capo who's close to him, his underboss, a concierge, some high-ranking soldier, to get somebody to become a government witness to testify against him. That's only 2 ways you can get a guy like John Gotti. But also, more importantly, our goal wasn't just to get Gotti. Our goal was to get Gotti and the new hierarchy of the family, to include a fellow named Frank Licasio and Salvatore Gravano, to take out all the Gotti loyalists in one fell swoop.
The Gambino squad's first major breakthrough came from the testimony of a high-level defector to whom Gotti had admitted his role in the murder of Paul Castellano. Today, he is one of those whom Gotti blames for his downfall.
He feels that I'm the cause of all his problems. I went to a grand jury and I told them everything I knew about John and the meetings we had, about him saying he killed Paul Castellano, about him saying he got the okay from the commission. And I would testify about the family, him being the boss, structure of his family, the things, the favors that my uncle asked of him, some bookmaking involvement, the Gambino problems, and everything that our meetings were about.
Philip Leonetti was the underboss to his uncle Nicky Scarfo.
Hey, Nicky!
Together they ran the Bruno family based in Philadelphia. Their high rank made them privy to the Mafia's innermost secrets, and they were allied to the most powerful families in New York.
He has the backing not only of the commission, but he's very friendly with the guys in New York. I mean, we had the backing of the Genovese family and other families too. The Gambino family owed us a favor because we did kill somebody for them. We were very friendly. He was very powerful. They all liked him because he was a killer. A lot of guys liked that, and he wanted to kill more and more people to impress the guys in New York.
Mr. Scarfo, you've been gone for 17 months now. Any comments?
No, I have no comment. Please, let me get by.
What's the first thing you're going to do now, sir?
Nick Scarfo and his nephew Philip Leonetti were a fearsome combination. Operating in Philadelphia and Atlantic City, they ruled with a reign of terror.
Our strength was, people feared us because my uncle was he was a stone killer. Everybody knew when they seen one of us. There was no problem with giving up any money. Guys that were in illegal businesses that we shook down, they would give it up, no problem at all. We even had guys coming around to hang out saying, look, I'm going into this business here. I'm going to pay you now for, every week for whatever I make. They were even coming themselves. We didn't even have to go looking for them. They were scared. Everybody was scared to death of my uncle because he had a reputation for killing, because he loved to kill people.
You actually enjoyed it?
Yes.
Scarfo wouldn't hesitate to shoot somebody in a split second. He was a true gangster. He was another Al Capone. I mean, very, very vicious. Feared no one. And this thing came first with him. He believed in this mafia with all his heart and soul.
He always wanted the reputation. He always said, like Paul Muni said in the movie Scarface, he had a machine gun. He says, you got to use this machine gun. You got to kill people and you got to keep on killing them to be the boss. You just can't stop. You got to keep killing.
You got a hit list of 15, 20 guys to shoot on sight. And night and day, we used to go hunt them down. We had teams.
One of their targets was a diminutive mafioso, Harry the Hunchback Riccobini.
Continue to stand. Raise your right hand. Do you swear the testimony you will give before this subcommittee will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, I do.
The Hunchback and his crew fell out when they refused to pay a greater share of their illegal profits to Scarfo.
Identify himself.
I participated in maybe 15, 20 murders at the time, in that course of time. And after that course of time, from like 82 to 86, when I became a government informer.
Nicky Scarfo and his nephew Philip Leonetti were not just killers. They and the family they controlled derived tremendous power and wealth from their business operations and the rackets they ran, both in Philadelphia and Atlantic City.
How influential and powerful were Nicky Scarfo and Philip Leonetti in Atlantic City?
Very, very powerful. No major construction project was done without their knowledge. No illegal activities such as loan sharking. Not so much drug activity. They weren't as heavily involved in drug activity, but loan sharking, gambling, prostitution, they had pieces of all that type of operation.
Well, we had a lot of bars that were under our control. We had businesses in the casinos, maintenance companies, where we were making money. We were making money with Local 54, which was one of the most powerful unions in Atlantic City. We had all the unions tied up in Atlantic City. Teamsters, carpenters, cement, everything.
In the early 1980s, control of Local 54, the union that supplied the workers in the casinos, gave the Mafia a stranglehold in Atlantic City.
There are 40,000 people who work here in the casinos, and the Local 54, the Bartenders Union, has about 14,000 of those people that are members of the union. They have a health and welfare fund, they have a pension fund, they have a severance fund. Scarfo was then able to, by controlling the Bartenders Union and controlling the officers of the union, he was then able to have them appoint to office people who were members of organized crime. He was able to have them hire companies that were controlled by organized crime or paying kickbacks and bribes to organized crime to provide services to them.
Well, Frank Gerace, the president of Local 54, he dealt with the casinos, with the owners. He dealt with the contracts. One time, in 1983, he was having a problem with the Playboy. And they didn't want to sign a union contract. They tried to break the union. So I sent somebody to see the owner that I know and told him, if you don't sign it, we're going to kill him. And he signed it.
Put your card in.
That was our territory. If any other family wanted to come down here and do something, they had to get permission from Scarfo. But mainly, Atlantic City was ours. We could do whatever we want down there.
We could have stopped everything. We could have shut them down, you know. But if this didn't work, you know, we would try another way. But
And you had this sort of influence over all the casinos?
yeah, every casino that dealt with the union, which was all of them, they all had to be unionized. And Frank Gerace made money with them all.
And they knew if they didn't do what you wanted, you could just close them down?
We sure could. That's right.
Leonetti and Scarfo also controlled the local politicians. In the early 80s, they fixed the elections for the mayor of Atlantic City, Mike Matthews.
Mike Matthews was with us. We got all the unions to support Mike Matthews. We had everybody going for him. The casinos, everybody. And he won. And I had this agreement with Mike that if he won, he had to make Joe DePasquale the chief of police, which he would listen to whatever we said anyway, because he was with us. We made him mayor. He couldn't have done it by himself.
You're going to see a lot of new construction and some completed construction. I think you'll see another 3 or 4 casinos in town, and I'm very optimistic about the next 4 years.
He was under the protection of our family. He would listen to whatever our family told him to do. He had to do.
And if he didn't?
He would get killed.
Did he know that?
Yes.
And what about the chief of police? What influence do you have over him?
Whatever we needed with him, he would do with us. I was friendly with him.
The main advantage of their political control was the influence it gave them over land development deals. The casino boom had fueled massive speculation in property prices in Atlantic City.
There was a casino project that was proposed over in the inlet section of the city, and the project needed some city-owned land in order for the project to put together a parcel of ground that was big enough for this project. And it was necessary for them to get the city to sell them the land. And Leonetti had a partial interest in this, and in exchange for an agreement with the mayor of the city that they would turn this land over to them or sell it to this particular group, they agreed to offer the mayor either cash or a percentage interest in the company itself. And unfortunately for the mayor, one of the people that they were dealing with was an undercover DEA agent, and they didn't know that, and the mayor accepted money from them, and he went to jail.
But they bought the mayor of Atlantic City.
Yes, they bought the mayor of Atlantic City.
They also bought a white Rolls-Royce and a luxury hideaway in Florida where they flaunted their wealth. But unknown to them, they were secretly accompanied by FBI agents who were beginning to build up a powerful case against the entire family in the mid-1980s.
Well, that's our family. They're the guys that belong to our family, and we would go down there on vacation. My uncle bought a nice house down there and a nice boat. And we had the boat docked behind the house, and he would invite everybody down, and we would enjoy ourselves down there. It was like relaxation time.
Pretty unusual to have an entire Mafia family on a boat.
Yeah, I know. That's how the jury's seen it, too. I mean, it really buried us, all them pictures of everybody together. It really showed that we were a family, you know, all together like that.
Despite the appearance of a close family, Scarfo was paranoid and psychotic, constantly sensing betrayal and treachery. He even doubted the loyalty of one of Leonetti's best friends, Salvi Testa. He ordered his execution.
So they gave me and my partner the hit on Testa. Now Testa felt some bad vibes because he knew what he did wasn't right, and it was pretty hard to get him because we wanted to shoot him in the store where we hung at. It was pretty hard to go lay anywhere because if he saw us, he would have known. He couldn't figure out who was going to do it. So we tried for 6 or 7 months to try to get him. We just couldn't get him.
How did you feel then, knowing that one of your best friends was going to be killed?
I felt sick about it. I felt sick. And I hated, he would hang around with me every day. He would come to the office. It was during the summer while they were planning to kill him, you know. He got killed in September of '84, but during this time, every day he's at the office and I'm looking at him. And I was getting sick, and I was with him all the time. And we went out to dinner one time, and he changed. She said, "Philip, let me sit over there," because he didn't want his back to the door. So I got up. All right. I said, "Look, Sal," I said, "if something's going to happen, if I see somebody coming, ain't I going to tell you? Somebody's going to come?" He says, "I know, Philip. I'm so crazy right now. I don't know how I'm thinking, you know." He was suspicious. He felt like he was going to get killed, but then he thought maybe I won't let nothing happen to him because I could talk to my uncle. He was being really careful.
So anyway, this fella came in the store. He shook his hand. He got up and shook his hand. As soon as he turned around, the fella grabbed the gun and shot him in the head. He went down and shot him again. That night, me and my partner and another, he was a proposed member at the time, helped take the body out. This was like 9 o'clock at night, and we took it like 30 miles and dumped it in Jersey.
Testa's body was found here in the aerial section of Gloucester Township. The body was easily visible from the road, apparently dumped here hastily late last night.
Why couldn't you just say to him, "Look, you can't do this"?
Because he would have killed me, siding with Salvi. If I would have told Salvi to run away, he would have killed Joey Punchator and his whole family, thinking that Joey Punchator told him. He would never expect me to do it. You know, he would trust me too much.
But some of these people must have been your friends.
Oh, some of them. Salvi Testa I loved. I spent almost 2 years with him night and day. And I knew, you know, his loyalty to this thing. And I used to get nightmares over him. I mean, I used to wake up screaming because I just loved the guy. I didn't want to see him die. So many times I wanted to tell him, "Why don't you leave town?" But I couldn't. Every day I was trying to kill him.
The only people that Nicky Scarfo thought he could really trust were his own blood relatives. In the winter of 1986, he sought permission from the Commission, the Mafia's secret government in New York, to make his nephew Philip the underboss of the family. New York gave their approval.
Philip was the number 2 man in the family. He was the underboss of the family. And any time that anybody had a problem with the labor union, they would approach Philip, and Philip would approach one of the people that he had control over in the labor movement. And if he had a problem with a laborers union or a Teamsters union or cement masons or iron workers official, he would just call them, tell them, this is our project, keep your people away from it. We're going to do whatever we want to do there, and you guys stay away, and that's exactly what would happen. And so any time that the mob wanted to do anything in Atlantic City, they would approach Leonetti. Leonetti would give them their approval, and then he would tell the union officials, stay away.
People have said they were very afraid of you.
Well, if they did something wrong to our family, or if they did something wrong to me at that time, yeah, I guess they would be very afraid.
Why?
They should be, because there's a possibility they could be killed, you know, or whatever they did. Of course, we weren't playing games. Everybody, it's a serious thing. And whoever did something wrong with us, especially with my uncle, I mean, got killed. That's what we did. That's what we know how to do, kill people.
But the killing would eventually get to Leonetti. Even he couldn't stomach the cold-blooded murder of Salvi Testa, his childhood friend. He began to question his blind loyalty to his uncle and his oath of allegiance to the Mafia. Eventually, Philip Leonetti, the underboss of the family, would become one of the highest-ranking defectors ever to betray La Cosa Nostra. In the spring of 1986, a secret and high-level Mafia summit was held in New York City. John Gotti, the new head of the Gambino family, and his right-hand man, Sammy the Bull Gravano, had invited the leaders of the Philadelphia Mafia to New York to explain the new order, why Castellano had to be killed, and how the Mafia would now be run.
Well, Sammy introduced us to John. You know, he introduced my uncle as the boss of the family, and John as the boss of their family. Introduced me to him. And he told my uncle, said, look, Nick, he says, before we even get started, I want you to know, I did everything the right way. You know, I killed Paul with the okay of the commission, and I did it all. I followed the rules on everything. My uncle said, oh, I know that, John, you know. But we still double-checked it afterwards.
Leonetti's meeting with Gotti would prove to be a crucial piece of evidence for the FBI, but so too would the fruits of a surveillance operation which in the late 1980s had pinpointed a promising location for a bug in the heart of Little Italy. The FBI succeeded in placing secret microphones in the Ravenite Club. They also bugged an apartment on the second floor where Gotti was conducting his most secret meetings.
Once we got the mic installed, then it was more like a war of nerves, because you always wonder whether the tech guys got discovered or compromised. You always think the worst thoughts. So for a number of days, nobody went up to the apartment. We hear John go in the club. We hear him go in the hallway. They didn't go upstairs. You always think maybe something happened, maybe discovered the mic. We were compromised. But on the night of November 30, 1989, we heard the back door of the club open. We heard him walk through the hallway on our second mic. We heard him walk up the steps. We could hear the apartment door open, and we could hear the voice of John Gotti inside the apartment.
Not in the mood for toys or games or kids or type. I'm not in the mood for clans. I'm not in the mood for games. I'm not in the mood for none of that stuff there. This is going to be a Cosa Nostra till I die. Be it an hour from now, be it tonight, or 100 years from now when I'm in jail. It's going to be a Cosa Nostra. They're going to be, once your friends are going to be friends of ours, but the same friends will be friends of ours.
We were elated when we heard first reports how well it was working. Of course, the next day, we listened to the tapes here in our office, and we heard how clear they were, and the clarity was just incredible. There was talking freely. They were talking criminal matters. And then we knew that we were going to get John Gotti, just on that one conversation.
He's got the liaison guy getting whacked because that don't belong to us. That's their fucking crew. And he's got to get whacked because he's getting for the same reason that Jelly Belly's getting. If you want to challenge the administration, you will meet the challenge. And you go
They were great. They consisted of the administration talking about people who had been killed and why they had been killed, people who were going to be killed and why they had to be killed, their gambling operations, their labor racketeering, their discussions about who was going to become a made member and whether the people who were proposed to become made members had fulfilled the requirement of having killed somebody. It was very much sort of opening the window into the administration of the Gambino family. There was no small talk up there, no idle chit-chat. They went up there to be private as an administration to run the family. And those are the tapes that were the heart of our prosecution.
Meanwhile, the FBI had moved against the leaders of the Mafia in Philadelphia. Scarfo and Leonetti had been betrayed by some of their own soldiers and were facing prison for the rest of their lives.
Would the jury believe that Scarfo and his 8 friends conspired, then murdered former gang member Salvatore Testa back in 1984? 2 former members of that gang, Thomas Del Giorno and Nicholas Caramondi, said they did.
They convicted everybody of everything. And I was sentenced to 45 years. In the meantime, during the trial, though, my cousin Mark, who was real friendly with my son, my uncle's son, he was 17 years old at the time, hung himself. He destroyed a young life, and I was worried about my son because that was his best friend. My kid, when this happened, he went like in shock. He couldn't believe it. My kid's going to school. He's doing very bad in school. I got a teacher in the civics class is teaching him about organized crime in high school. The boss, Nick Scarfo, the underboss, Philip Leonetti. His name's Philip Leonetti. I mean, the kid don't have a shot. I said, what am I doing here? Before I was sentenced, I don't know how I did. I got enough strength. I called the FBI because it was hard. Because I was thinking about it, thinking about it, I didn't know what to do. I finally called them before I was sentenced, and I got Jim Morrow on the phone.
I was called to the telephone. The voice on the other end said, do you know who this is? I said, no. He said, you're supposed to be an expert identifying voices. I said, well, I don't know your voice.
I said, I thought you were a voice expert. You recognize all these voices on tape in court. He said, who is this? I said, this is Philip Leonetti.
This is Philip Leonetti, and I want to talk to you. I said, when and where? He said, now. I told him that I would have to tell the judge that I was going to go talk to him, and that based on my experience, I thought that the judge would tell his lawyer.
I said, well, if you do that, then everybody's going to know that I'm going to cooperate. I says, I can't take a chance like that. He said, well, let's wait till after your sentence, and then I won't have to notify him. I said, okay.
So he agreed to wait. He came in 7 to 8 days later and was sentenced. He received a 45-year sentence. And within, I would say, 5 minutes of receiving that sentence, a U.S. Marshal turned him over to my custody. We brought him back to this office and began to talk to him.
And I said, look, I'm concerned about myself. I'm concerned mostly about my son. I want my family out of this area. And I want my son to have a shot in life. I mean, because right now he has no shot. He's always talking about hanging with Nicky, his cousin Nicky, and helping me out that way. I said, he's under the wrong impression. I want him really to focus himself on schoolwork and, you know, what could you do? What could you do for that, you know, for me that way?
He said that his main concern was for his son, that his son's life wouldn't be squandered the way he had squandered his own. He told us about the impact that his cousin Mark's suicide attempt had on him, that he had been contemplating cooperating since about that time and just couldn't find a way to do it.
He was in the same jail with his uncle. His uncle was his constant companion in jail.
He says, look, we'll move your family. Can't promise you anything because we don't know anything what we could do for you. But we'll move your family, your son, to a different area. I said, all right, not right now. I didn't even talk to my family yet. I don't know if they're going to accept this or what's going to happen. It took me time just to talk to my family about this. Little by little, as they came to see me, I mentioned it to my mother. She said, do it, do it, do it. Which I was surprised, you know. I didn't know how she would react.
Eventually, we made an agreement. Philip agreed to cooperate. The only promises that were made to him is that we would keep him alive while he was in jail and make the extent and value of his cooperation known to the judge if he should ask for a reduction, and that we would move and give new identities to his mother, his girlfriend, and his son. There were no promises at all made to him about what his sentence might be.
So we left. Me, my son, my mother, and my girl. And, you know, they brought me to a safer prison to stay at. They moved somewhere else. My son got settled in school. And right now, he's in a university in a pre-med course. It's unbelievable.
The judge was so impressed with his cooperation that his sentence for murder and racketeering was reduced from 45 years to 5. Under the federal witness protection program, Leonetti is now free with a new... In New York, the FBI were closing the net on the Gambino family. They now had Leonetti's testimony, and the Ravenite tapes were providing damning evidence of their power and wealth.
Money is received from the garbage club. Money is received from the control of the piers, control of the International Longshoremen Association. The proof at trial showed from John Gotti's own mouth that he would get $3,000 from each captain for John Gotti's birthday. 21 captains, so he would get $63,000 in cash on his birthday. He would get similar amounts, if not more, from each captain as a Christmas present. The family received $2 per cubic yard for every yard of concrete poured in New York City, and has received that for many years because of an understanding among the families that that's a Gambino family interest. He told Frank Locascio on tape, John Gotti did, that he received $24,000 a week just from the construction interest controlled by Gravano. That's $1.2 million in cash each year to the boss just from construction.
I got something that's about to get said. I don't want to start like a chin in with people who bad precedent. So I'm asking you, how you feel? You want to stay this good here? Or you want me to make you official underboss, acting boss? How do you feel? What makes you feel better? Think about it.
The tapes even recorded Gotti making plans to keep the family going should he end up in jail. But the FBI arrested both Gotti and his anointed successor, Sammy Gravano.
Good evening, Mr. Gotti. Are you surprised? Pretty good. You know they're going to try and keep you in jail. They say you're a danger while you're out. What's your reaction to that?
In a carefully planned operation, the FBI raided the Ravenite headquarters of the King of Little Italy. They also arrested Sammy the Bull Gravano, depriving him of the chance to run the family while Gotti was in jail. As ever, the media was on hand to record what would be Gotti's last public appearance.
We arrested Gotti, Sammy, and Locascio. They were all sitting around John's table having coffee when we walked in.
Were they surprised?
They were shocked. They were totally shocked by this whole thing. A few days after the arrest, we held a detention hearing for Gotti, Gravano, Locascio in the Eastern District. And during this hearing, we played certain evidence for the judge. We played some of our key tapes to prove the existence of the conspiracy, the existence of the enterprise, prove the existence of our murders that were committed. And one of the tapes we played was our 12-12-89 conversation between John Gotti and Frank Locascio. Sammy wasn't there. And during this conversation, John Gotti was bad-mouthing Sammy from start to finish. So Sammy heard for the first time, sitting next to John, his boss bad-mouth his very loyal underboss. And following the conversation, they went back to the MCC, and John braced up. I'm sorry. They went back to the MCC, and Sammy braced up John and said, "Look, John, what were you meaning by all this?" And John said, "Look, I've just blown steam, Sammy. I was just hot at the time. I didn't mean what I said." Well, in the La Casa Nostra, especially the Sicilians and Italians, what John said was irrevocable. And Sammy knew then in his heart that if he ever got to jail, he had to kill John, his brother, and his son, all the Gottis, or John in turn would kill Sammy and his whole crew. They can never ever go back to the way it was.
He told you, didn't he say why he's feeling in jail? Everything that anybody's got to is what this when they got in them, how they got in them. I want to know when and how they got in them. These are all businesses that nobody had a fucking lawyer, Frank. Matter of fact, I know multiple guys. My son will open all the companies up. My brother said, my son was there. Nobody will open all the companies up. So finally, and Sandy, he made my brother picture about that fucking asshole, but with no man time he's going to jail. Tell me something that one of my family had that they never had before. I'll make the fucking in the ass. But that ain't gonna be. When my came, you don't worry about my
So based on these factors, John and Sammy had a falling out, and for a few months they actually didn't talk to each other. The ironic thing is that John never once said to Sammy, his close lieutenant, "You know, Sammy, what's wrong with you? Something bothering you?" Like you would to somebody who worked for you. John is too absorbed in his own self, his own interests, to notice that his close lieutenant wasn't talking to him. So as a result of the above, Sammy reached out to the FBI in October of 1991, and on the night of November 8, 1991, we got a court order to retrieve him from the MCC, and that night we pulled him out about 1 o'clock in the morning, took him to a safe house, we got an initial debriefing, and then we took him off out of the area where we maintained him until his testimony at the trial.
Following in the footsteps of Philip Leonetti, another high-level Mafia figure would now testify against Gotti. It was a devastating blow for the Godfather and a great victory for law enforcement.
In Sammy's words, he said, "If John Gotti is the most important mobster in America, I'm his underboss and I'm the second most important mobster in America." So by Sammy's own admission, and of course we know this, that he's the second highest ranking Mafia, La Casa Nostra member in America to come with the government.
With Gravano's testimony, Gotti didn't stand a chance. He was finally convicted in the spring of 1992 and is currently serving a life sentence in a maximum security prison. Yet even a prison cell has not finally put an end to the criminal career of the dapper Don.
Is John Gotti still running the family from jail?
That's hard to say. At this point, there is no indication that anyone else is running the family. He does have meetings in jail. He is not, at this point, the former boss. He is still the official boss of the family. And we can only assume, pretty confidently, that he's running the show from his jail cell.
Even inside America's maximum security prison, the government is still monitoring the words of the Godfather.
John Gotti still run the family from prison in Marion, Illinois.
Can't you stop him? I thought you'd locked him up.
He's all had visitors. His son visits him. His brother Peter's a capo visit him. He gets visits from attorneys.
Although confined to a cell 23 hours a day, Gotti is permitted 5 visits a month. But even as he attempts to cling on to power, so his influence within the family is now beginning to wane. In time, Gotti himself will be succeeded by a new Godfather.
He's still running the family, but day by day he's losing control. A lot of people are defying his orders. They don't listen to him anymore. A lot of them know he's never going to come back from jail, so his control is slipping day by day.
With the passing of time, the tradition of secrecy and the vow of silence are no longer the unshakable beliefs of a secret society. The values which once made the Mafia so powerful are now slowly fading away.
It isn't what it used to be. I mean, no one claims that anybody's wiped out organized crime, but the face of organized crime has changed dramatically because of these defections. And whatever face it has in years to come, it's not going to be what it used to be.
The annual festival of San Gennaro. Little Italy celebrates the traditions of the old country. The hope for the FBI is that the Mafia will come to be seen as nothing more than a relic of a dying culture, and that John Gotti will be remembered as the last king of Little Italy.
In the war against the Mafia, where do you think you stand now?
We've been fairly successful, but there's a lot of work to do, and we're a long ways away from saying, yeah, we neutralize these families.
One former associate of the Gambino family told us that you can never put the Gambino family out of business. It would be like trying to put General Motors out of business.
We will never, in my lifetime, put the Gambino family out of business. Our mission is to try to neutralize it where it's no longer effective or has any impact here on the people of New York.
It's supposed to be underground. It came out from under the ground and thought it was maybe Hollywood. Everybody thought they were in Hollywood and were stars. The newspapers, maybe everybody's mentality, oh, this is great, I'm in the newspaper, I got a good suit on, cover of Time magazine. Maybe it went to everybody's head. And the power went to everybody's head. But it's not going to be that way for long once the government gets done with everybody. Because I think they'll have more and more people cooperating. Definitely.